All right, so I'm Caitlin, and this is,
Casey.
and we have the history of the Order of Operations, better known in America as PEMDAS. Come on. I have to go this way. Okay, so here's a brief overview of what we are going to be doing. We're going to be talking about the history of the Order of Operation, which means we're going to be talking about the beginning, the process of how it was done here and maybe other places, and then examples of the Order of Operations. So the beginning. Say what? All right. The rules for the orders of operations are the steps that you take in order to do the problem in a sequence. And after doing a decent amount of research on the topic, there's no real idea of when the order of operations started. A lot of research kind of ballparks it around the 1600s, saying that this was the first time that they agreed that multiplication was first and there was an actual order to math. And then later, towards the 1900s, they officially decided that multiplication was the leader of the other symbols, before things like parentheses and exponents were really pushed into mathematics. So again, the order of operations is just the rules for what steps you take in the order of a math sequence. And fun fact, that's not going to be necessarily true later in this. All right.
So we also looked into BEMDAS versus PEMDAS. PEMDAS is, as we know, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. BEMDAS is actually when you just replace parentheses with brackets, and that's typically used in more Excel math when you would see brackets being used. Like it says in our PowerPoint, that they're just the same. It just depends on what level of math, and no matter if it's the BEMDAS or PEMDAS, it's always whatever comes first, whether it's multiplication or division, because we read left to right, and so you do the same in an equation. We have BOM, the BOMDAS. That's actually what they use overseas in Europe, and that just means that they do brackets and order. Order is the same thing as exponents. That's just what they call it. So we added that as a little fun fact.
All right. So in terms of today's version of the order of operations, they're teaching less about PEMDAS, which I learned as parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, but the whole my dear Aunt Sally reference. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We used mnemonic devices back when I was in school, and I think Casey talked about that too, is how you used please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. But we are shifting away from using the mnemonic devices and more towards understanding the actual problem itself and why we use the order of operations and things like that. Part of that is the use of vocabulary. So in certain mathematical equations, when you're using the PEMDAS style, multiplication doesn't necessarily trump division. The only reason why multiplication really is first is that it's can be communicative or associative, and then division not necessarily as much. And then the other reason why we are learning to teach for understanding is for practical application. So people learned that PEMDAS was more used mnemonically and they didn't actually understand the function of it. So they want to start using it more practically, talking about it in terms of money. Well, you have this many coins and you want that many coins and things like that. I did find a very interesting video on the orders of operations and how using PEMDAS may not necessarily be the best way to go. Feel free to look at it. I loved it as someone who struggles with math, but I won't go fully in depth with that. You can just see the beginning. If you went to elementary school, much of it is mathematics. All right, so that's just a little like explanation on how the order of operations is and why it kind of can be confusing between PEMDAS and actually understanding order. So yeah, right now we're trying to teach for understanding rather than teaching to know the mnemonics. Less of a trigger and more of like practical application, so you generally understand what you're learning. So here comes the example portion.
So this is just a reference guide of a graphic that we found explaining the PEMDAS and then how it shows that if you have multiplication or division or addition or subtraction, how, like we had said before, it's whichever comes first, left to right. As we read left to right, it would be the same order. And then this is a worksheet that we found. I had read that teachers use this in their classroom. They either hand them out to their students or some people actually laminate them and leave them on their tables while they do math. It's just a way for students to see that on the side you have the parentheses, exponents, multiplication, and then how it says my dear Aunt Sally. So just a reminder for them to associate the two. It also has 3 examples of how you always work left to right and how they go through the problem and how to do the problem by using the order of operations. And then this example also just shows that we go through and how the correct order is to do parentheses first, and then you do the exponents. So we'll go with the left one, the 10 minus 5. It shows how they do the inside of the parentheses, because when you have parentheses, you're just simplifying inside of them first, and then it shows exponents and how they do 5 to the second, and then how they add 5, which being addition, the last step since there is no subtraction, and then it comes up with the total. And then the problem on the right is the same thing. It shows going through the parentheses first, and then doing your exponents, and then division and addition.
And then our final example is more of a look at that new understanding of math. So in the first one, where it says correct order of operations, it discusses that you use division first because, like Casey was emphasizing earlier, you work left to right. Even though PEMDAS tells you that multiplication comes before division, it's not necessarily true, and that's where people get tripped up. And that's why they're pushing away from the mnemonics more and more towards just general understanding. You do division first because division is first in the sequence, and then you work your way through it. And then adversely, there's another one that's the incorrect order of operations. So this would be the one if you were following PEMDAS, which would be multiplication before division and exponents first, obviously. But in this case, you would get the wrong answer if you're doing multiplication first compared to doing division. And that there's an emphasis on left to right rather than just understanding your mnemonic. In conclusion, we were talking about how the history of the orders of operations is a little foggy, focused a lot on kids understanding simple directions in school, and then worked their way into now learning the functionality of the math. And that's the end of our project. Stop recording.